The choice of cardinals that Pope Francis has selected has caused a lot of debate in the church. And as Pope Francis himself has said, and a couple of times, he likes to hear us, our thoughts, the feedback on the church, the discussion that's having and so forth. So it's in this filial, loving, Catholic way, I'm trying to give feedback to the church on what is going on in the church. I'm trying to give feedback to you. I'm not doing this in a spirit of hate. I do not hate the Holy Father. I do not hate the leadership in the church. But I'm just asking the simple questions. What is going on? Explain it to us. Explain it to faithful in simple terms, please. What is going on in the church? We used to look to the church for leadership, for clarity, for stability, for direction. And, at the moment, all we get seemingly is very muddied confusion. That's my impression. And, there's going to be a mountain of commentary on it. But the two Dominican bishops, and I esteem the Dominicans. I love the Dominicans. I think they're doing fabulous work. But guys, of all the Dominicans around the world that the Pope could have chosen to become cardinals, he chooses one of them that has, well, I'm not going to even talk about Radcliffe because so many bloggers and so many people have already spoken about what do I need to say. All I will say on Timothy Radcliffe, and this is my point, and I know the LGBT community, I'm using that term. People know me, understand where I'm coming from here. I know. And I will say to Timothy Radcliffe, yes, there are many people there, great people, loving people, without a shadow of a doubt. But sometimes Satan uses our compassion against the faith. And that is I'm going to leave it there. I'm sure Timothy Radcliffe is probably one of the nicest Dominicans you could meet, a very good person. But sometimes when you're discerning this, you have to discern how Satan uses our compassion can be a weakness sometimes in allowing us to arrive to the truth, in allowing us to preach the truth to other people. Our compassion can be a weakness. And his pronouncements and what he wrote in the Observatory Romano, all I can say is you're on the wrong path. You're on the wrong path. You are leading people away from the truth or delaying people arriving to the truth. And I know many people don't want to hear the truth these days because the truth isn't popular. The truth, the Catholic faith isn't popular anymore. But if we don't have leaders that lead us to the truth, we are lost. And I will say and I'm not going to cause a debate regarding Timothy Radcliffe, but I will talk about the bishop in Africa, the Dominican in Africa, because he certainly has had more problems than Timothy Radcliffe. And I'm just going to read you out something here that what he says. Monsignor Jean-Paul Vesco assumes that baptism does not save. That's what he said. Baptism does not save, and that we must forget about evangelizing. His words. I'm assuming, now this is I'm going to put a link to the media below. It says Jean-Paul Vesco, who has been Archbishop of Tangiers since February 12th, based on his interpretation of Pope Francis' words about human fraternity, he maintains that baptism is not necessary for salvation. Therefore, he assumes we have to get rid of the idea that we have to evangelize, and that there may be a part of the truth in Islam which perhaps escapes us. These are his words. Now, unless somebody can come to me, no, you're taking it completely out of context. Every day we meet people who tell us that they know our religion and why it is not a true path to God. It is difficult to hear these speeches with the Quran as an irrefutable argument. In turn, let us be careful with ourselves whenever we are tempted to look at Islam in a negative way. We have to get rid of the idea that we have to evangelize, that we have to put others in contact with our truth. It's not our truth. It's not your truth, Bishop. The gospel isn't yours. The good news isn't yours. It's a truth that Christ gave us. He is the incarnate word of God. And you're playing with the truth here. A truth which thousands died for. And so many martyrs gave their life for. You're playing with the truth. It is better to bring one Muslim to the truth than to deny Christ in this way. And at the same time, accept that there can also be a part of the truth in Islam that escapes us. I mean, as I say to Dominicans, I love you. I respect you. I think you do great work. But the two Dominicans that the Pope has chosen to elevate as cardinals, please, I'm not the only blogger. I'm not the only Catholic that's asking, what is going on? We don't need to evangelize. Baptism, you don't. Close shop. Close shop. Close the diocese there. What's the point? Send them all off to. Do we believe anymore? Do we believe? Another cardinal that the Pope has elevated denied communion to those wanting it kneeling on the tongue. Get up, get up. The only cardinal that he's elevated in Africa, born in Africa, is one of the few that agrees with him on fiducia supplicans. Not a single cardinal elevated in Uganda, which is the 13th largest Catholic population in the world. Not a single cardinal elevated there by Pope Francis, who has had more consistories than Pope Benedict, than Pope John Paul II, and Pope John Paul II lasted for a lot longer. Now, I know good Dominicans probably say, well, Robert, look, see what St. Thomas Aquinas said in such a place about those who are not baptized can be saved. And have you not read Lumen Gentium in Vatican II, etc., etc.? I understand. But sometimes we take these arguments and, we extrapolate conclusions that really go against the grain of the gospel, of the early church, of the mission that Christ gave to the world. I mean, maybe somebody can explain it to us in different terms, but I thought we were supposed to go out and give this to the world. But anyway, maybe the world doesn't need Christ anymore. Maybe, it's not necessary, imperative anymore to proclaim the gospel. But anyway, I just find it very interesting, the whole discussion. And I suppose there are those there that will know more than I do. But I'm going to relate a conversation that I had, a prophetic conversation that we had. I don't know why I remembered this exact conversation I had 30 years ago. And it was in St. Peter's. We were waiting for an audience or a mass or something like this. And we were just seminarians there. And I vividly remember, and I've said this before, I vividly remember a conversation we were saying, what would happen if Father Martial had a wife or a mistress at the time? How would that impact us? What would happen to us? How would we react if Father Martial didn't turn out to be the saint that he was held up as a living saint? Never call anybody a living saint, but anyway, he was held up as a living saint, a mystic. And so there was, we were just having this silly conversation. What would happen if Father Martial wasn't who, hypothetically, nothing would happen to us because our faith is in Christ. We believe in Christ. Our faith isn't in Father Martial. We're in Christ. The hypotheticals. Of course, in 2009, when the whole empire came down. Hundreds of priests in a vocational crisis, hundreds of religious, the faithful in the Regnum Christi. People don't realize how big that crisis was. I know many legionaries would have masked it, put on the front, but, I think every single legionary of Christ would have cried. I know that. And if they weren't crying, they were just in self-denial. No, it's not true. I even met with Legions of Christ in Rome around that time, and they would not believe. I remember sitting with one at a meal in Rome, and I was there with another man, a former legionary, and we were there with this priest, and we just said, look, Father, this is what happened. And he says, I don't believe it. I don't believe it. And I remember looking at the other man. I said, there's no point in getting into an argument. He has just convinced himself that it can't be true. That there must be some ulterior, like some mental illness or something like this, but it just can't be true. And of course it was true. He didn't just have a mistress. He had a few mistresses. He had children, we know, with 2 women at least. He abused his own biological children, or the children that one of his mistresses had before she had children with him, or something like this. And he abused, obviously, many, many, many seminarians in the early part of the Legionaries of Christ. And he arose to the top of the church. He rose to the very, very top. How many times he would eat with the Pope. His relationship with cardinals. When we look today in the Vatican, we see Cardinal Kevin Farrell ordained in the Legions of Christ. Cardinal Kevin says he only met Father Martial once or twice. That was in an article in the Irish Times. I printed it off. And he left for ideological reasons. Well, he didn't just meet Father Martial once or twice. We know that to be a lie. He knows that to be a lie. But anyway, a bit like, I knew nothing about McCarrick. Nothing. I'm shocked. Out comes the McCarrick report. In a little footnote. On the grapevine, I might have known about McCarrick, blah, blah, blah. Says the cardinal who lived with McCarrick. And we wonder how these men get to the top. Well, I asked the same question in the same conversation 30 years ago. We had this hypothetical discussion about what happens if a man without good intentions gets to the papacy. And people will be there saying, shocked, Robert, you're treading on very dangerous ground by talking about the Pope. I do not hate the Holy Father. Let me say that again. I do not hate the Holy Father. And I do not want you to hate the Holy Father. To be clear, my simple question to the Holy Father is, we don't understand you. There's a certain side of the church that understands you extremely well, that's very happy with you. And there's another side of the church that does not understand you. That doesn't understand what you're saying or trying to do. They didn't understand Pachamama. They don't understand the synodal process. They didn't understand the Amazon Synod. They don't understand Amoris Laetitia. And when you elevate bishops to become cardinals who say that baptism is not necessary for salvation and we don't need to evangelize, we don't understand what you're doing. And that's just from a simple human point of view. I was in Knock the other day on Saturday, and I couldn't help but seeing hundreds of Catholics there with a Bishop Bellini, the offshoot of Bishop Williamson. And I was going to go up there and say, well, look, why are you guys there doing this, going off with this renegade bishop? And I said, look, there's so much confusion in the church. God loved them. God loved them. Like, there really is. There's so much confusion. God loved them. That's all I did. I just said, sure, there is that much confusion that those that actually believe in the faith, one pope tells us one thing and another pope tells us the opposite. One pope says what previous generations held sacred is sacred to us too, and the other pope says the opposite. One pope says, I want a synodal church, but there are voices in this church I will not listen to, and push those aside, and I will draw the voices I want to hear so that I can be in my own echo chamber here, and then this is the synodal process. And I'm just saying that is what synodality is, an echo chamber of a certain sector in the church. It is. It's an echo chamber for a certain part of the church. Then people will say to me, look, Robert, it's about bring together those, the liberals and the conservatives, and trying to, so that they all listen to each side and they can move forward. You not understand the Pope is trying to bring together the church and fiducia supplicans. It's a compromise document to try and steer people in a certain direction. Okay. I hope I've misjudged the Holy Father. I really, really, really do. I pray and hope that Robert Nugent, Irish blogger, is completely wrong. I hope I'm wrong. I absolutely do. People might say I'm a bit crazy to say this, but I really, really, really do. But I just can't help get the feeling that I've seen this before. I've been here before. The Jesuits themselves had their own. The Jesuits themselves said that this was coming. The division was coming. His own peers. And people, people say we shouldn't talk about the Pope, or we shouldn't criticize the Pope, or we shouldn't say anything. That's akin to how we were brainwashed in the Legionaries of Christ about not talking about the obvious problems that were there with leadership. We were made take a vow to not criticize our superiors. So nobody could say anything about Father Martial at all. If you said anything, you were out the door. And it seems this sense that there's this consensus in some of the Catholic circles, Robert, you can't criticize the Pope. You can't say anything about the Pope. Well, you're just giving me the same logic that was given to us in the Legionaries of Christ. No, you can't criticize leadership. If we don't point out the problems in leadership, then we're just going in the same direction as the Legionaries of Christ went. Because the problems were there. I remember as a seminarian in early 1990s, 1992, summer of 1992, I was living in the General Direction in Rome, Via Aurelia Antica. And I remember Father Martial, who lived in the same house, he'd come down and he'd have dinner with us. And I would sit beside him in Via Aurelia having dinner. So he would have his own little table, his own little tablecloth, and his good cutlery and his good glasses, and his special food, because he had a special diet, and he lived in a special apartment with carpeted rooms, and he had a special car, a Mercedes, with his chauffeur. And me, simple farm boy from Ireland, and I was thinking, God, this poverty thing is great, isn't it? You're poor in spirit. Did St. Francis live like this? Like with all these special concessions that, you're living in the lap of luxury, let's face it. You have your own little apartment with your own kitchen, a Mercedes, and you sit with us and you cannot eat what we're eating. or use the same cutlery as we're eating, or the same glasses as we're using, and you have to, of course, but then you're kind of blinded because everybody's saying, oh, no, Robert, don't, the elephant in the room, the emperor has no clothes here. Quite obviously, the emperor had no clothes in front of me. I'm sitting next to Father Martial, and this is what's going on in my mind. And I had to self-convince myself that what I was actually seeing, the emperor with no clothes, was wrong. But I was right. I was right in 1992. What my conscience was telling me was right. They were wrong. I was right. I don't think people realize, if you've not been in the church to see this, to experience this, to actually meditate on it, you said, I was right. I was right. I go up to my room and we had this big shelf of green books. Anybody that's been there, my peers, you know what I'm talking about. This big shelf of green books, all the letters of Nuestro Padre. That was who he was called, Nuestro Padre. All these letters, and we were supposed to use them for meditation, for spiritual life, if we were giving talks, and you'd understand the spirit of the Legion and know everything about Father Martial. I couldn't read them. And I used to think, I'm strange. I don't get any spiritual nourishment from these things at all. But I thought I'm wrong. I thought I'm just stupid. Now, I was very immature. People know me. I was extremely immature. I should really never have been a seminarian or gone into the Legion. I went in at 18 and I was extremely emotionally immature. Okay? And you just think you're just stupid. What am I doing here? Like, what? All of these great people in the church, in the Legion, all these great people, and this is not what I was cut out for me. But I think God uses the stupid people like me to realize things. I think God uses, kind of these stupid fishermen, these stupid farm boys to knock sense into us. Do you not see now? Because I was right. All of those, what the people were feeding on, it was nonsense. It was fictitious. It was a tower that God destroyed. All those green books of letters, and he didn't even write them. He didn't write them. His secretaries did, and all these people did. It was just fake. And yet he was held up as a model of orthodoxy. And, I get the same sense with the Pope. And people say, you're shocking me. No, but I get this. There's something that is unsettling. It's very unsettling to see what is going on in the church. It's as if the Pope says, look, I'm just going to do my thing. And I don't care about all of these career bishops that have been, waiting to get a red hat. You just step aside. I'm going to come in here and select whoever I want. Okay, that's fine. That's not leadership. That's not leadership. That's egoism and pettiness. It really is. There's one bishop that I was in contact with, Bishop Chaput in America. He was brought in to after the whole Legions of Christ thing, and we exchanged emails because they were asking for feedback on what went on in the Legion. So I just gave him some feedback and so forth. It was very nice. He was very kind. And so forth. But, I would consider him a great bishop, a great archbishop. I would have considered him a good spiritual leader. Yeah, and you know what? He would have been expected in a sense, okay, look, these are the men that we have formed, but anyway, he's been passed by, and I just think it's very sad to see a man like him pass by, people say, oh, that's just life. But as again, I'm going to be clear here, and just so the people understand, I'm not naive to what is going on in the church. I'm not a naive blogger here that's just out there to raise his own profile. I had to live through abuse in the church, abuse of conscience. I had to live through the abuse of conscience. So my conscience would say something, but I had to convince myself that what I was seeing was wrong. And so when people say to me now, Robert, be quiet, don't talk about the Pope, and don't be criticizing, don't be using your platform for this. Maybe all of that was training 30 years ago. Maybe what Christ was doing in the Legion of Christ was training the church for a crisis that might come in the future. A miniature crisis for what happens when the next Pope comes guys, sincerely, what happens when the next Pope comes and says, well, look, the previous Pope, he made some decisions that he shouldn't have made. He created some bishops and put people in certain places that maybe were questionable. People will say, well, John Paul II did that. He did, actually. But did he know? I don't know. I hope I'm wrong. I really, really, really hope I'm wrong. I really, 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 really hope I'm wrong. When I see what Vigano says, sometimes I hope Vigano is wrong as well. But when you hear so many messages of Our Lady and so forth, and people say, oh, you get hung up on this, and is she a real mother? Does she intervene? Has she spoken to the church at times? Do we believe in Fatima? Do we believe in Akita Garbandal? She would warn us. You're going in the wrong direction. Well, I'm warning you. The mission of the church is not to make yourself friends with the world. Another cozy ideology to fit in with all the other ideologies of the world. It's to give an uncomfortable truth that some people will not listen to and others will. And the thing is, sometimes the truth isn't popular or comfortable. Do you know what I mean? And I can say this from my own life. If people had, you learn from mistakes or you learn from listening to good advice. And it's far better to learn from somebody who knows. Be careful. But as I said, I give this video with absolute love for the church, love for the Holy Father. But I say to the Holy Father, you're going in the wrong direction. You're leading the church in the wrong direction with the people you're appointing, with the confusion you're creating. That's just my opinion on this. But then Robert Nugent could have totally assessed this completely wrong. But I was so right about Father Marcial. I was so right. I saw it. I called it out to myself. And then I had to confess, no, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. Can't be true, can't be true, can't be true. What you're seeing before your eyes, it can't be true. It was true. It was true. It was true. And what I see happening in Rome scares me, in the sense that people say, oh, why are you taking religion seriously? Why are you taking this seriously? Christ's message is incredible. And yet we are clouding ourselves in Satan's temptation at this moment of time. But then who am I? The church will learn either by listening to the truth or from your mistakes. And we'll see where this goes. God bless you. Take care. Bye-bye.